Hey, what is up everyone? Welcome to Effects Maniac. This is Syed Mahmoud Amiri again. Welcome to another great tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you guys how to use Tyflow. So, it is going to be a tutorial for absolute beginners. So I am going to assume that you have zero knowledge about Tyflow, even though almost 2 years has been from its release. And so I am going to assume that you've never used it, and it's going to be a very basic beginner's tutorial. And hopefully, if you watch this tutorial till the end, you're going to be able to do some things like these. So you're going to be using Tyflow to create lots of different objects which are colliding accurately and really nicely with each other. And then you have this example. It can be anything. It can be cars, it can be humans, it can be letters. So hopefully, so if you watch this tutorial till the end, I'll show you guys how to do something like this. But first, if you go, so the first thing you need to do is you need to go ahead into my audio aura channel and subscribe to my channel. It's not necessary, but if you want to support me, then you can definitely go ahead and subscribe. So if Audio Aura is basically a music channel of ours. So me and one of my good friends, he's producing all this music, really high-end, no copyright music, so you can use it for your videos. And all I ask is just subscribe and support us. So just go ahead and do it right now. All right, you did it, right? Okay. So about Tyflow, so if you want to go ahead and download Tyflow, so you can go ahead Google like Tyflow, and then you have this you can go ahead check out this video. It's great, and you can see its capabilities, and I'm sure you already know it. You already know how powerful this tool is. It totally changed the the face of dynamics inside 3D Studio Max. So you click here, and then it's going to take you to the download page. And it says it's in beta version, but you can use it for both your personal and commercial projects. So you're going to go ahead and click this I accept the Tyflow thing, and then you want to go ahead and download it. And once you have downloaded it, you want to go ahead into your program files, C drive, program files, Autodesk, 3D Studio Max 2021, the version I'm using, and then in plugins, and then you're going to go ahead and paste the tyflow.dlo in there, and then you want to go ahead and open up 3D Studio Max, and it comes here. So it comes in a few different places, some different parts of Tyflow, but the main one is here. And then you have the Tyflow mesher and stuff, and then you have also some helpers of Tyflow. So a lot of things are there, but the main one is in the standard primitives. So before getting started, I just wanted to tell you guys that if you go ahead and click on this Y Tyflow, so there's a reason, and then Tyflow is basically an unofficial replacement for 3ds Max's particle flow. So if you've used like 3ds Max's particle system, which is particle flow, so if I go back in 3ds Max and hit 6, so you have this particle view. If you've used this before, it's gonna make it a lot more easier to be able to understand Tyflow, because most of the operators and everything is the same, even though a lot of new and better things are there inside Tyflow. So if you've used this, it's going to make it a lot more easier using Tyflow. So finally, let's get started using Tyflow. So again, I am going to assume that you've never used it. And I do have a lot of other tutorials about Tyflow. So I've done a lot of cool tutorials, which you can go ahead and check it out. But this one is for absolute beginners. All right, so yeah. So once you've installed it, you want to go ahead, click on this Tyflow, and drag the icon out anywhere in the scene. It's just an icon. It doesn't really mean anything. It just has to be there, big or small. It doesn't really bother. It doesn't really matter. So you can just go ahead and put it somewhere in the side, but make sure somewhere it is accessible. And then if you go into the modify panel, you have two things. You have the editor, which if I click, the same window as the particle flow shows up. And then you have the outside settings, which are actually, all the operation and everything happens inside the operators, and the flow and everything that you do with your particles, it happens here. And then more of the general settings and the quality of your physics simulation and retiming your simulations and debugging and all other stuff is happening here, which we're going to be taking a look at later in this tutorial. All right. So once you open the Tyflow editor, you have this main UI, which is the interface. You do all your connections and your operations and everything here. And then you have your operators. So you have different categories of operators. So there's a lot of them. And again, if you've used particle flow, most of these will make sense to you. But if not, don't worry, because we're going to be taking a look at a lot of them in the series, in this series of tutorials about Tyflow. And then you have a little bit of a description. If you select anything, like if I select position object here, it just tells me a little description about this. So the position object operator allows you to position particles on a surface of volume, any scene's geometry. So it just gives you a little description about everything. And then if you drag one out here, you have the properties bar about that operator. So you click on different operators, and the different properties of that operator just shows up here. So you can go ahead and use that. All right, so here a little introduction of the interface. And now I'm just going to show you guys quickly, like if this is your first time using Tyflow, I mean, I would recommend using like a 2-monitor setup for Tyflow. One is for your 3ds Max scene and one for the Tyflow sort of editor. But in this case, I have one because of the recording. So yeah, just for your first mini project inside Tyflow, what you can do is if you right click, you have some preset flows and you have some options here, which we're going to be taking a look at. You can change the layout of your columns and stuff. You can go ahead and operate as vertical and stuff, which I don't really like. And, the default seems to be fine and stuff like that. So you're going to go ahead, go back right, and then you're going to go layout, 1 column. All right. So for your first mini project inside Tyflow, you can just go ahead with the preset flow. So you have simple icon flow. If you click on that, you will have an icon with an arrow, which is basically the direction of the particles that are moving. So you have some particles falling off of this arrow, and you can go ahead and hit E for the rotation, and whichever direction this arrow is, that's the direction that the particles is going to move. So it is very simple, and that is how it is set up. So we are going to be building these things, and I am going to be showing you guys what each and every single one of these operators do and these options and stuff. But if you want to do something simple, you can just go ahead and use some presets. But interestingly, you can use this preset. So you can go ahead, you have some object flow, which is basically emitting particles from an object, but then you have simple physics flow. So you have this, and then the particles are falling down and colliding with each other, which is really nice. And it is one of the main things that separates Tyflow from particle flow. So in particle flow, you didn't have like inner particle collision. And, now you do inside Tyflow, and it is very accurate. So you can do almost every object colliding with each other. And then the thing you want to do is you want to go, whenever you use Tyflow, and you have heavy simulations, you can go into the time configuration and make sure real time is off. Because if you turn this on, the timeline is going to force the playback to play real time 24 frames, or whatever your frame rate is, 30 frames, and it is just going to miss some parts. But then if you turn off real time, the thing is going to do is it's going to calculate every frame. I mean, it doesn't seem to make a very big difference in this very simple scene, but when your scene gets very heavy, you need to be calculating every frame. So a frame could take a few seconds. So make sure this is off, okay? And you have this very simple setup. So if you play this, it will be calculated, and then once it's calculated, it's already calculated because we have 2 less of an objects. But then if you go into the birth, and if I go ahead and change the number of total particles to 200 or maybe 2000, we're going to be having a lot of particles. And then you can see that this little frame updating is what's basically doing the calculation. And once it's calculated, it's going to be very fast. So you can see we have a lot of different objects. I mean, that is a little too much, but I'm going to change it to like 400, so you can have that one. And then you can change these objects to any object that you want. I mean, you can go ahead into the shape, and you can go ahead and change it to like any shape that you want. Maybe some toruses, mid-res. So you have these torus objects, just like that. And then you can go ahead and render it out for your first Tyflow simulation. But then now I want to go ahead and build this from scratch and show you guys what each and every one of these operators do. And yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and take a look some of setting this up from scratch on our own. And as you can tell from my voice, I've definitely gotten a flu, and it is very bad. But yeah, it doesn't stop me from doing a tutorial for you people. So yeah, so what I'm going to do is create new scene. So reset, don't save. Yeah. So you're gonna go ahead and create your Tyflow icon, and then the Tyflow thing, the source or whatever, and then you're gonna go ahead into the editor, and I want to emit particles from an object or the icon. So it depends on you or whatever you want. So the last time we checked, it was from the icon. So I'm going to go ahead and in this case emit particles from an object. So I'm just going to go and create an object, maybe like a torus or whatever, and you can draw it here and then move it up just here and scale it down. And then you want to go ahead into the Tyflow, and you can just here. So you want to birth some particles, right? So we have a few different ways to birth particles. You can use an object as a particle. You can birth like skeleton, birth spline and stuff, birth surface. But then we want the birth operator by itself. So click it and drag it there. Or you can go ahead and hit tab and just search the name of the operator, which is going to make it really fast. So birth, and hit enter, and then you have it. So you have the particles being born, and you have one because that is basically there. And then if you click on the birth operator, you have the properties here. So it's going to start from frame 0 to 100, and then it's going to be a total of 200 particles. So now our particles are there, but because they're in the exact same position, we don't see 200 particles. So what you can do is you can go ahead and add, we want this to be on top of an object, right? So you can go ahead and click or just drag from the operators list. It's called the position icon, which is basically the same thing. Uses a scene's geometry to position the particles. So you can just drag it here or just click on this event, hit tab, and add a position object. Okay, and then you want to pick the object, so click pick and then pick it here. And then you have little particles if you move throughout the timeline, and you can change the color to be more visible, so red, and you have these particles here. And the reason they're displaying as small dots is because if you go into the display, you have the type to be small dots. So you can go with ticks, which is more particle flow like. You have large dots, which in this case is much more visible. And you can see that they are sort of creating the particles over a period of 100 frames. So you can go ahead and make it less, like 10 frames. So by 10 frames, you have 200 particles, and then it stops. So you can change it. You can change it to like 2,000 particles. Yeah. So by 10 frames, the 2,000 particles are going to be born there. Maybe I'll change this to 40. Yeah. And then you have some other options, which we'll be taking a look at. So repeater is just going to repeatedly, emit particles, like, bursting them. But now we want the particles to have a shape because they don't have a shape. So you can go ahead, hit tab on this, and add a shape operator. So the order of them is important. So we have given birth to some particles, and then we position them on top of an object. Now we want to give them shape. So you have to put them in order, and then you can pick any shape from the scene, or we have some built-in 3D shapes inside here. So I can go with a nut, and it doesn't show up here. And that's because if you go into the display operator, you have them to be displayed as large dots. So you can change it to geometry, and then we can see those geometries. But they are very small. You can go into the shape, and you have a size option. And if you turn on the scale, you can go ahead and change it like 300, so it's going to be bigger, or maybe 400. But then you also have a separate operator for it. So if you hit tab and put on like scale, and the reason I said that the order is important is because if you go ahead and change the shape, the scale value, it will not affect the particles. And that's because it is after the birth and not after the shape. So first they are scaled, and then you have the shape scale. And this scale is going to override this scale. In order to make sure that this scale affects these shapes, you can go ahead and put it afterwards, and now they will affect the shape of the particles, the scale of the particles, sorry. So the order is important. And then, yeah, so you can go ahead and do that. And then you can go ahead and turn on the variation of the shapes. So they're going to be some variation, but then you can see that some of them getting squeezed. So you can turn on the uniform. So there will be uniformed particles. So hit Z on this, and yeah, we are giving birth to some particles on the surface of this. Okay, so that's pretty nice. You can go ahead and check that out. Now we want the particles to fall down. So the thing that we want to do is you can go ahead and add a force. So force, again, it needs to be in the bottom of the scale. And then you have the built-in gravity. You can use the legacy 3ds Max forces, but in this case the built-in gravity just works very fine. So you can go ahead and type a negative value to like negative 0.3, and now you have the particles sort of falling down. So they're getting born and they're falling down. We may want to increase this scale a little bit to like 220 so that we can see it a little better. And yeah, so they are falling down, but they're going through the floor. So if you want them to collide with the floor, you can go ahead, do one thing, create a floor. And in order to make them collide with the floor, you need a collision operator. So there's a collision. And then the operators that are actually having a little, rope or a little, pick whip, that means that you can link this event to another. So after they collide, you can do something with them. So we will be taking a look at them a bit later, but in this case, you can just pick the collider, and this is going to be the floor. So you can go ahead and do that, and you can see that they are colliding with that floor. But the thing is, they're not colliding with each other, and that is a problem that we had with Tyflow or particle flow. But luckily in Tyflow, we can easily fix this. So you can go ahead and add a physics shape. So physics shape, and then if you even go into this operators list and you go into the physics shape, you can see that the physics shape operator allows you to convert particles into physics rigid bodies. So this is really nice. And now you can see that you put it afterwards, of course, you will be having the particles sort of colliding with each other. So you have inner particle collision, and they are colliding with each other. And as I said before, you need to turn off real time. So yeah, now they are sort of colliding with each other, and that is really nice. So and you can give him some extra, like any material that you want. We'll be taking a look at that. But then you have some particles here. So I don't want it to be like 2000, so I want it to be like 400, but I want them to be very big. So you go to this scale, and then you can go ahead and change it to like 400. So I'm just showing you these objects, just an example. So, and the other thing is, when you use the physics shape operator, you don't necessarily need like a floor, because it is going to use the grid as the floor, right? But the collision operator is for those cases that if you want these particles to collide with an object. So let's say just you have like a teapot here, right? You want the particles to collide with the teapot, of course. So what you can do is you can go ahead into the collision. And in this case, when you use the physics collision, physics shape, it is better to use the physics collision instead. So you go ahead with physics collision, and that will give you a few extra options as far as the, it will make the shape of the object a lot more accurate, and it's better to use it with the physics shape. So the physics collision, you can pick the shape, and now you can see that if I display the hole, you can see that's what I'm talking about, right? So there, it is using that wireframe, that hole as a shape to collide the objects with, which is not accurate. So you can see that they're not really sort of, colliding with, they're not falling down from here because you have this this bounding box. But if you change it to mesh, it is going to be using the mesh itself, which is going to make it really sort of nice. So you can see that it's colliding very accurately, and you can see that they are really colliding really nicely with the teapot, and some of them stick there because they that's how real physics work, right? So that's basically it. And then in order to increase the quality of the simulation and the collision of the objects, you can go and select your Tyflow, go into the main settings, and then you have these time steps. So the lower it is, the more it's going to increase the quality of the simulation. It's going to calculate it more. It's going to take a bit more time, but it is going to make it a lot more, accurate. So yeah, and then the other thing you can go ahead and play around with is if you go into the physics, you can go ahead and substeps, the simulation substeps like 12, which will definitely increase the quality of your collision and your simulations in general. And you can already see it has affected the speed of our simulation, but it's definitely worth it. But once it caches, it plays back in real time. All right. So yeah, if I go ahead again, you can see that when they are falling down, they're really falling down in a very vertical sort of pattern. So what you can do is select the event, and by the way, you can go ahead and right click and rename the event. So it's going to be the first Tyflow simulation or whatever, and you can turn this on and off by clicking on this bulb here. And yeah, so the thing I was talking about is when they're falling down, they are falling down in a very vertical fashion. So I want them to be random. So what you can do is click here and hit tab and add a rotation operator, which is really nice. So now they are sort of rotated randomly, random 3D, so they don't look, very uniform, right? So yeah, that is basically our simulation. And as I've shown you in the beginning of the tutorial, so we've already talked about some operators, and we will be talking about a lot of other operators and different setups using Tyflow. But in this case, I think for your first day and for your first simulation, this is going to be very good. And as I promised in the beginning of the tutorial, I'll show you guys how to set this up, which I'm very sure you already know it by now. So yeah, so instead of those nuts, I have these sneakers or these iPhones or these letters. So yeah, so if I go ahead into 3D Studio Max and I open my scene here, the recent scene that I've done. So if I go ahead and play this, I have a camera here, and I have a seamless background, and I have some lights, which I've already talked about in a lot of my other tutorials, but I will show you guys how to set it up, So instead of, having those objects, if I go and select my Tyflow, I have a very simple flow here. So I have the very same thing. The only difference that I have is I have a spin, which is rotation is basically like a static value. So each of them is going to be rotated like randomly. But then spin is actually it's actually like a continuous sort of rotation. So it allows your objects to be continuously rotating, as you see here. So when they're falling down, they're rotating. And then most of the operators I've already mentioned, the force, physics collision, physics shape, and icon, and scale, and all that. And then the only thing that I haven't mentioned, you guys, is the mesh operator. So the mesh operator, you're going to use it whenever you want to render out your scenes. So if you don't have this, you will not be able to render your particles. And then I've used like some V-Ray lights. So I'm obviously using V-Ray to render this out. You can use Arnold, Redshift, or Corona. All of them are supported by Tyflow. And then if I close this off, so the one other thing that I haven't talked about in the basic simulation that I've shown you guys is, if I go ahead and take a look at these videos, they're falling down in a very slow motion, cool sort of fashion, even though in this one as well. So the thing is, so I've already picked this shape, and I've shown you guys how to use this 3D shape, but then you can also use, you can go ahead and add selected, which I have this iPhone model here. So if I go back to the perspective view, I have this iPhone model, and I've just added selected as the shape, or you can go ahead and change it to like these Snickers. So if I go ahead and add this one as well, so it's going to be a combination of these two, or if I remove this, you'll be having the Snickers. So yeah, they are sort of colliding with each other using the same fashion. So if I go back to the camera view, that is basically it. But then I didn't change the material, so it's taking the iPhone material, but it doesn't really matter. That's not the case. So for the material, you can just go ahead and select the Tyflow, hit M, and you have this material for the Snickers. So you can just click on it and apply it, and then you have the material. So that is very simply, you can change the shape. But then the other thing is how to make it slow. So normally it is very fast, but then you can go ahead into the retimer, and I've used it. So if I go ahead and enable this by speed, so now it's like 100% the speed, right? So if you want to make it slow, you can go ahead and change it to be like 30% the speed. So now they will be falling down very slowly, and you can make it even slower by just lowering down this value. So if I make it 10, then you'll be having it super slow motion, but then you have to increase your timeline. So hold down Control and Alt and right click and drag, and then you can go ahead and check them out in super slow motion. So it is going to take a lot more frames, but then you will be having it in slow motion, so which is really nice. But then I don't want it to be that slow, so make it like 60%, right? And make sure when you change the value, you are at the first frame, and that if not, then it is gonna calculate till there. So it's gonna take a bit of time. But even though it took a few seconds, it has simulated that many frames. So which is one of the key factors of Tyflow, which makes Tyflow unique from other particle systems, is just it's really fast, and you can get some really quick responses. Okay, so as promised, that is how you make these effects. And I just have some lights here, some 3 lights, some Vera lights, and then you can go ahead and show the viewport IPR and see how this one looks. Alright, so I went ahead and took out a render. The viewport IPR just got crashed, and luckily I had it saved, but you do want to make sure to save your files. So the thing is, this is looking pretty nice, and this is all from this result of the simulation of Tyflow and the lighting and everything. And of course I'm using V-Ray, so yeah. And then for the letters, you can do the same thing. You can go into the shape and add them, and then you can definitely use like any shape that you want, right? So that is basically it. And then if you want to apply a material, just hit M, select Tyflow, and like just a normal standard material, just in case to show you, right? So you can apply like every material that you like and render this one out. And yeah, that is basically it. Make sure to add the mesh operator, otherwise it won't render. And then once you do, you can go ahead into Premiere or any compositing software and put them together, add some color correction and everything. So yeah, this was today's tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it, and most importantly, I hope you just grasped the idea of how big and how powerful Tyflow is. And we're of course barely scratching the surface. And I am going to be doing a lot more tutorials, the basics, and talking about the operators and different things about Tyflow. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, feel very free to support me by subscribing to my channel and like the video. And if you want to make me happy, you can just go ahead and subscribe to my Audio Aura channel and enjoy some royalty-free, no copyright music for your videos, right? So yeah, as I always say, I hope you enjoyed it, hope you liked it. Till the next time, enjoy working.